Et, 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 voilà. Ok. Essai, 1, 2, 1, 2, essai. Ça marche bien en fait. Je regarde si ça fonctionne toujours. Un, essai, et. Non, tu peux le faire là. Dis-moi quand tu peux le lire. C'est en live là. Bonjour à tous, et c'est 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, et c'est test micro. Je peux aller augmenter un petit peu. Et c'est... Pardon.
C'est vous, hein.
Alors, là c'est bon? Non. Et c'est 1, 2, test, et c'est 1, 2, 3, et c'est test. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Ok. Et
vous avez une bonne son, c'est ça? Ouais, super. Je vais me mettre là. Là. Ouais, je vais pousser cette chaise là. Bonjour monsieur. Merci. Ah, vous nous avez même prévu les câbles. Eh ben, j'ai tout. On te prend, hein. Ah bah ouais, les câbles, jamais. D'avoir un petit esprit expliqué, la pensée que voilà. Ah non, tu penses que c'est grand chose. Je suis un peu où là? Right. Yeah. In 7 minutes. Yeah. That's all right. It's not. No big deal. Okay, cool. I mean, you guys are gonna use it for? Yeah. Yeah. Let me. What's your email address? Yeah. All right. We'll do. Bon, je te le rends, tu sais. Je suis pas. Non, si. Sur certains côtés, je vais être un peu comme toi, mais tu vois de quoi je veux parler, hein? Je ne suis pas sûr comme toi. Les conseils à tout le monde. Bien, d'ailleurs, où t'en es avec. Alors, ils le veulent pareil. Alors, c'est celui-ci que je prends. C'est celui. Merci. Oui, merci. Si, regarde. Mais non, je te dis que c'est déjà très bien
pour des... Ouais.
Ils sont fait braquer? Non, putain. 12 caméras. C'est bizarre. Ah ouais, c'était vous connaissez la maison?
Ah oui, oui, ouais, il reçoit le signal. Ouais, ouais.
Il a dit que c'était de la ligne, non?
Essai, test. Oui. Essai, test 1, 2.
Test, ok. Allô, test, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, test. لا من الكاميرا ولا صوت كده استحمل ايه تست 1 2 3 تست 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 اوكي هستحمل ايه مكسوب بس من الناس اللي هنا c'est bon. Ouais, c'est bon, merci beaucoup.
Oui, essai 1, 2, test 1, 2, 3. Essai, test, micro.
Un de ceux-là, enfin un peu. Je crois que les trois sont.
Il faut demander à Kevin.
Je sais pas vu avec Silence celui qui préfère, mais je pense que un des trois.
Ok, je pense qu'il faut pouvoir le mettre sur l'ordinateur qui est sur la télé. Ouais. Je sais pas où est Kevin. C'est son ordinateur.
À 10h pile.
Est-ce que vous commencez à 10h pile?
Je pense pas.
Moi, je sais pas.
اوكي شباب الصورة عندكم عموما ما يكون ساعة اوكي
C'est pas un bon idée pour vous, caméra. J'étais assuré des petits coups. Je vois, ça se voit l'extérieur chez eux ou je connais pas, je sais pas en fait.
Il y a des va-et-vient, il y a pas de fête. C'est des gens qui Égypte, qui est
Ah ouais, ça va, on va faire ça.
4h du mat, et c'est un truc
Il y a même des chaises là. Avec du sel sur les tables. Quand je suis tard.
Ça, c'est.
Alors, c'est une j'ai pas d'image. J'ai pas d'image. Pas d'image.
Kevin, il y a une de. Qui voulait savoir s'il pouvait changer le logo. On a deux proposés.
Ouais, mais
non.
Il est là.
Je sais pas.
ça va être dur.
Elle veut connecter ça.
Ah oui.
Ouais.
C'est possible.
Alors, je sais pas comment ça fonctionne du coup, par contre.
Ah bah non, il n'y a pas le. Vous n'êtes pas équipé pour.
C'est super.
Je peux débrancher?
Ouais, allez-y.
Ah oui, d'accord. C'est vieux comme.
Ouais.
Vous avez rien pour brancher? Désolé.
Okay. Non, mais c'est moi. Merci.
Vous avez des petits enregistreurs aujourd'hui avec des prises micro? Ils sont pas super chers?
Ouais.
Non, parce que je vais pas rester. En fait, c'est juste au début, quand ils vont se mettre à parler, faut que je règle un peu le master. Mais sinon, je vois qu'il y a plein de techniciens. Vous pouvez monter le master.
Non, moi je me mettrai par là. Oui, je resterai sur le côté.
Are you sure you want me to move over?
No, you can stay here and I'll be sitting on the side. Okay? Or here, don't worry about me. Non, pas aujourd'hui.
Troisième micro, c'est bon.
Troisième micro, super. Merci. On commence. Je sais pas où ça mène. Non, je peux. Attendez, je vais. Pardon. Ah, j'ai pas de. Ça vous dérange pas?
Okay. You might want to put it here. If she's giving the majority of the presentation.
Ok. Thanks. Hop. C'était joyeux. Qui est-ce qui s'occupe du. Il faudrait baisser la luminosité un petit peu parce que c'est hyper fort. Ouais, je vais voir. Un petit peu. On commence pas tant qu'on n'a pas baissé un peu la luminosité de la télé. We're going to take 2-3 more minutes.
I'm going to do the same pizza cake.
Yeah.
We're going to put a shiny, which will be sitting here. Hopefully you'll be able to, the two of you will be able No, I'll take a chair and we'll come here but, afterwards. Okay? Because Eleanor is starting. Okay? Non, en fait, a priori, c'est principalement pour elle la traduction. Donc, si ça vous va, je vous mettre là. Et le principe, c'est de chuchoter quand on fait les présentations en français.
Juste éviter d'être tout le temps sur le côté. Ça
Ouais,
ne mange pas d'être sur le côté.
d'accord, c'est pour ça sur le côté. D'accord.
Merci à tous les joueurs.
Merci. Est-ce que c'est bon pour l'écran? Ça va l'écran derrière pour les caméras? Oui, c'est bon.
Je sais pas s'il attendait l'autre journée. Anne, tu veux pas voir si tu vois ça, mais tu me dis si c'est OK, parce qu'il attendait une ou deux autres personnes.
N'hésitez pas à venir, il y a un peu plus de place devant si vous voulez. On peut pas. Vous pouvez pas vous mettre plus haut, la caméra.
Les gens qui font 1m20 sont autorisés à se mettre
En fait, aucun problème, mais c'est bien la chaise là.
Il ne faut pas.
La lumière, c'est bien là.
La lumière, ça va.
Nobody can sit here. Why is the camera? Bonjour à tous, bienvenue à la FIDH. Moi, je suis Éléonore Morel et je suis directrice générale de la FIDH. Et on est très heureux de vous accueillir ici pour la présentation du rapport annuel de Mwatana. Je dois vous dire que c'est un très grand honneur pour nous d'accueillir Mwatana dans nos locaux, et en particulier Radia et Christine. La conférence de presse sera modérée par Sylvain de Crisis Action. Je voulais juste dire deux mots pour rappeler à quel point nous tous ici à la FIDH, mais aussi parmi les autres organisations qui travaillent sur ces thématiques et notamment sur la problématique du Yémen, on est tous très admiratifs de ces défenseurs qui se battent au Yémen dans des zones de conflit très compliquées et qui risquent leur vie au quotidien, qui risquent des arrestations, des détentions arbitraires, de la torture, y compris des disparitions forcées au Yémen. Donc, de toutes ces personnes qui, malgré ces menaces et au péril de leur vie, continuent à travailler dans des conditions extrêmement difficiles. Et donc, pour la FIDH et comme pour Crisis Action, c'est toujours un grand honneur de pouvoir travailler aux côtés de ces personnes. L'autre chose que je voulais mentionner là, qui relève plus de la FIDH, c'est que en octobre prochain, on aura notre congrès triannuel et que Mwatana, à cette occasion, deviendra une organisation membre de la FIDH. Ça fait plusieurs années déjà qu'on travaille avec Mwatana et on est très content de pouvoir les inclure au sein de la FIDH et de pouvoir travailler à l'avenir de façon plus étroite avec eux. Et justement, je pense que c'est aussi ça la force de la FIDH, c'est de pouvoir donner l'opportunité à ses membres, et notamment à Mwatana aujourd'hui, la possibilité de pouvoir s'exprimer et de pouvoir parler de leurs problématiques et de leurs recommandations dans un endroit qui soit plus sécurisé et où il y aura une autre dimension, puisque ça c'est confirmé avec la présence de journalistes aujourd'hui français, mais aussi de nombreux médias internationaux. Donc, je vous remercie encore beaucoup d'être venus. Encore une fois, je remercie Mwatana d'avoir choisi la FIDH pour venir présenter son rapport annuel et je vous souhaite une très bonne conférence de presse.
Merci Éléonore. Sylvain Biville, directeur France de Crisis Action, une ONG qui travaille en soutien d'ONG internationales et locales sur la protection des civils dans les conflits. Et on est ravis d'accueillir deux éminentes dirigeantes de Mwatana for Human Rights aujourd'hui. Je vous présente Radia Al-Moutawakel, qui est présidente et fondatrice de Mwatana, cette organisation yéménite de défense des droits humains, qui est, on peut dire, la principale organisation de défense des droits humains yéménite, qui jour après jour a des équipes qui, sur le terrain, documentent les violations des droits humains commises par l'ensemble des parties au conflit au Yémen. Radia Al-Moutawakel, certains d'entre vous la connaissent, elle vient régulièrement en France, elle est basée à Sanaa, elle voyage dans le monde entier pour essayer d'attirer l'attention sur la terrible guerre au Yémen. Et pour information, Radia Al-Moutawakel a été nommée il y a quelques mois parmi les 100 personnalités les plus influentes selon le magazine Time Magazine aux États-Unis. Avec Radia Al-Moutawakel, nous avons le plaisir d'accueillir aujourd'hui Christine Beckerley, qui est directrice juridique de Mwatana et qui a une expertise sur la documentation des violations de droits humains dans le monde entier et particulièrement au Yémen. Aujourd'hui, ce n'est pas une conférence de presse de plusieurs ONG qui attire l'attention sur le Yémen, c'est un moment pour Mwatana for Human Rights, pour vous présenter en détail le travail au quotidien de travailleurs, de défenseurs des droits humains au Yémen. Jour après jour, année après année, dans des conditions de sécurité extrêmement difficiles et dans des conditions d'anonymat requises par ces conditions de sécurité, les enquêteurs de Mwatana documentent les violations commises par l'ensemble des parties au Yémen. Et aujourd'hui, c'est ce travail exigeant qui va vous être présenté aujourd'hui, de la documentation de l'ensemble de ce qui a été vu par les enquêteurs et les enquêtrices de Mwatana au cours de l'année 2018. Pourquoi c'est important aujourd'hui, même si l'année 2018 est terminée depuis plusieurs mois? Parce que, comme vous allez l'entendre, dans les faits très précis et documentés qui vont vous être présentés aujourd'hui, il y a énormément d'enseignements qui permettent de comprendre l'évolution du conflit au Yémen aujourd'hui, d'insister sur l'importance de la lutte contre l'impunité au Yémen. Mais je ne vais pas parler plus longtemps. Je laisse Radia Al-Moutawakel vous présenter les principaux enseignements de leur rapport 2018 qui s'appelle Withering Life, qu'on a traduit en français par... comment est-ce qu'on l'a traduit en français d'ailleurs? La vie en péril, la situation des droits humains au Yémen en 2018. Donc, 10 petites minutes de présentation de Radia Al-Moutawakel, suivi de 10 petites minutes de présentation complémentaire de Christine Beccarlé, et vous aurez ensuite la possibilité de poser les nombreuses questions que j'imagine que vous avez déjà pour mieux comprendre ce conflit au Yémen. Radia. Et juste une précision aussi, je voulais dire que ce qui va vous être présenté aujourd'hui n'est qu'une photographie de ce que Mwatana a documenté. Les chiffres des violations des droits humains dépassent bien sûr les seules choses que Mwatana a documentées, mais la rigueur scientifique dont fait preuve Mwatana les oblige à ne présenter que les violations sur lesquelles ils ont pu recueillir des preuves.
Okay, thank you, Sila. Good morning. Thank you for all of you for being here. I want to thank our partners, FIDH and Crisis Action, for having us to organize this press conference. We work in the ground, but only with our international partners we can do advocacy all over the world. And I also want to thank Mwatana's team in the ground. They are working very hard to build a human rights memory. These stories they are documenting every day comes a part of their daily life. It's not easy to be very close from the victims and not being able to provide a very direct help for them. But they believe that telling the truth deserves all of this effort. You know, Yemen now is known like the worst humanitarian disaster in the world, but we all know now it's a man-made crisis. So we cannot talk in Yemen about the humanitarian crisis without talking about the human rights crisis, because the violations of all parties to the conflict led to this humanitarian disaster. And as Sylvain said, this is the type of violations I will present today through the annual report of Mwatana. It's only that has been documented by Mwatana. The situation is still much bigger than Mwatana and much bigger than this report. It's withering life because, I mean, the life in Yemen is just destroyed by all parties to the conflict in different ways. And these are the very direct violations. And what's going to be this is our second annual report in Mwatana. We usually do reports that concentrate on one type of violation and sometimes in a certain party to the conflict. But the annual report, it's a chance to say the overall violations that are happening in Yemen in general through a report. And you will see that is very clear, the absence of accountability in Yemen, because the violations are not getting less in spite of all the work that has been happening internationally. It is increasing. So we have field researchers in 20 governorates. It's 20 over 22 governorates. We're not covering 2 governorates in 2018, and we hope to cover 22 governorates in 2019. We have field researchers all over Yemen. In this report, we have conducted about 2,065 interviews with eyewitnesses, survivors, humanitarian and human rights workers. And when we in Mwatana, when we say we documented this incidents, it means we have been to the field and we have talked to these people through interviews, and we take all the information that make us very clear that to put it in a report, and we document civilians in general. And some, it's usually we take the permission from people we talk to put their names and to put the names of the victims. But in some very sensitive cases, we just keep the names not known because of safety. So I will just go through the different types of violations and the numbers. And Christine, my colleague, then we can go in more details. So in 2018, Mwatana documented at least 150 airstrikes by the Saudi and Emirati coalition that hit civilians and civilian objects. 375 civilians were killed. 165 among those are children and 50 women. And also 427 people were injured. In most of these cases, the 150, we couldn't even find a military target. It was a 100% civilian area. In some of the cases, there was a potential military target, but the civilian harm was very high.
On a un petit problème technique, mais on travaille dessus pour que ça revienne.
Do you need it to be a PowerPoint, or my voice is enough? Okay. So that was the airstrikes. We have also ground attacks. And before going deeper, because the airstrikes is clear from the Saudi and Emirati coalition, let me tell you the list of violators in this report and in generally in Yemen. It is the Ansar Allah armed group Houthis. It is the Saudi and Emirati coalition. And we also have a Hadi government. And we have proxy forces, United Arab Emirates proxy forces. And we have groups and forces also loyal to Hadi government. And above all of this, we have the drones. So in the ground attacks that are happening in different areas in Yemen, we documented in 2018, 87 indiscriminate ground attacks. And in these attacks, 124 victims were killed. 6 of them are women and 52 are children. You will see that the number of women and children is very high in most of the incidents. So 49 of these attacks was committed by Ansar Allah Houthis. 26 attacks was about forces loyal to the coalition and President Hadi, and 7 attacks we couldn't know who is the responsible of them. And we have in Yemen this huge kind of violation, which is the landmines. We have been documenting a lot of cases of landmines. We used to have a report about the landmines that was planted by mainly Houthis. In 2018, we documented 25 cases of landmines where people were killed and injured. 60 civilians were killed in these cases, 8 women and 26 children. 51 was wounded. 49 of these cases, those who are responsible of these cases are Houthis mainly, and other cases is still unknown. And with the problem with the landmines, with the problem with most of the violations in Yemen, that the violation itself, it's not the end of the tragedy. So if it is an airstrike, ground chilling, or landmine, and then you lost whether party members or parts of your bodies, then you will not find a medical treatment. You will not find a compensation. Usually those people, most of them are very poor. It's very easy. It's not easy for them to adjust their lives again. So it's just a part, it's the very beginning of the violation. And we have a huge number of recruitment and use of children. We documented in 2018 1,117 children recruited or used for military purpose. So 72 of these incidents who are responsible of them are Houthis. 17% is by the security belt. When we say security belt, it means, and Hadrami elite, it means the United Arab Emirates proxy forces, and 11% by groups and forces loyal to the government or President Hadi. Also, there is a huge file in Yemen about arbitrary detention and forced disappearance and torture. And this file is divided also between all parties to the conflict. One of the statements that Mwatana has released was about torture, and the title was Multiple Powers, Same Mandate. This is what's happening in Yemen. You will see that the violations is divided between all parties to the conflict. So only in 2018, we at least documented 224 cases of arbitrary detention. 132 it's by Houthis, 59 is by forces loyal to President Hadi, and also what we called popular resistance. They are also under the umbrella of Hadi government. And also there are 33 cases about the under the responsibility of proxy forces of the United Arab Emirates. All these names are very new to me. That's why I keep remembering who are they. So this is the number that those people have been detained only in 2018, but still there are many people who are detained illegal from 2014 until now. They are still in prisons. We in Mwatana have lawyers in 7 governorates who are following daily after the cases of arbitrary detention and forced disappearance. We managed to release about 24 of these people who were detained because of the legal following that we are doing, but most of them are still detained. And also the same thing with the enforced disappearance. So it's not only detention, it's also enforced disappearance. We documented 203 incidents, 29 of them under the responsibility of Houthis, and 112 under the responsible of United Arab Emirates forces or forces loyal to President Hadi. And this is happening among the 20 governorates. Also torture, we documented 62 cases of torture in 2018. 70 of them are under the responsibility of Houthis, and 2 of them have been died because of torture. And 45 incidents it's entered the forces, United Arab Emirates proxy forces, and 2 of them were died. And there is a new case of torture that happened in Saudi Arabia against fishermen. They were taken from the sea to Saudi Arabia. 11 of them, they have been tortured by Saudis, and 1 of them was a child. Sexual violence. Since the beginning of the war, we have been trying in Mwatana to document cases of sexual violence. It was very, very sensitive file, and we couldn't find incidents, not because this is not happening. It's impossible to have a war and the whole country is controlled by armed groups and there is no cases of sexual violence, but it's very sensitive. In 2018, for the first time, we could document 7 incidents of sexual violence. We couldn't mention the details of these incidents in the report because it's very sensitive. Most of them are children. One of them, she's a girl. The details are very horrible. And in some of the cases, the victims and their families, they went to the police to file this incident, but nothing happened, I mean, positively. Attacks on schools. So also in attacks on schools, we documented 60 attacks. or use for schools by parties to the conflict, including 2 airstrikes. So it's 22 cases of schools occupied and 36 cases of other forms of school use. 52 cases responsibility is for Houthis and Ansarullah, and 8 cases who is responsible of them. It's the Saudi and Emirati coalition, and also forces that is under the loyalty of Hadi government. And also attacks on hospitals. We documented in 2018-16 attacks of hospitals, healthcare centers, and medical personnel. So it is also divided between Ansarullah 4 attacks, the Popular Resistance and Hadi government 7 attacks, and also 2 attacks by the Saudi and Emirati coalition. So blocking the humanitarian supplies, we also documented 74 incidents for obstruction of humanitarian access. And we say that these humanitarian incidents, it's worsened the humanitarian situation, it worsened the famine situation, but it's not the only cause of the famine in Yemen. We documented 74 incidents of obstruction, 62 by Ansarullah, 6 cases by Hadi forces, and 6 cases by Saudi and Emirati coalition. And finally, we have the drone attacks. In 2018, we have documented 6 drone attacks where civilians and civilian objects were affected. 22 people were killed in these drone attacks. 3 of them are children, and 1 was wounded. And among all of these cases, it was only 1 person. More than the 22 incidents, there was 22 victims. There was 1 who's affiliated to Al-Qaeda. It will be 23, but without the 1 who's affiliated to Al-Qaeda, it's 22 people. So also we have undermining rights and freedoms about also the journalists. You know that the space of freedom in Yemen is shrinking. The space of civil society is shrinking all over Yemen. So we have documented also cases. It's divided among all parties to the conflict to restrict the press of freedom, and also to restrict the work of civil society. And also, you know, in Yemen, we used to go before 2014. There was a lot of movement in the streets. There was a lot of sit-ins. There was a kind of life in this level. After 2014 until now, it's very, very little. But even when it happened, it was faced with a lot of violence. One happened in Sana'a, and it was faced by violence by Houthis, and one happened in Al-Mukalla, and it was faced by violence by the Hadi government forces. And also we have the religious minorities. We have in Yemen Baha'is. They are a very peaceful group in Yemen. They have been targeted by Houthis since 2017. And even in 2018, they documented, they detained more Baha'is, and there is also unfair trials happening against one of them. And we have done many things to try to release those who are detained, but we couldn't, just like the journalist that has been detained by Houthis, about 13 journalists. We have done everything that can be done to release them, but we couldn't. And we have also these fake trails, if we can use it like fake. Some of them, they were just, like one of the Baha'is, he were sentenced to death. And also just recently, Houthis sentenced to death 30 of those who are arbitrarily detained. And the movement in Yemen. So the movement, it's very difficult, not from Yemen to outside Yemen and the opposite. It's very difficult also inside Yemen. Now Yemen, it's full of checkpoints, and each checkpoint, it's a country by itself. So you can be attacked only because of your name, because of the city that you came in, because of many reasons that you can expect or not to expect. There are many checkpoints related to Houthis, related to Hadi government that abuse people, detain them, and make the movement for them is very difficult. Besides that, it's not easy for Yemenis to travel outside Yemen or inside Yemen. And you might know that Sana'a airport is closed by Saudis since 2016. Many people, they cannot travel from Sana'a to Sayoun or Aden airports. It's many hours with a lot of risk and a lot of expenses. And still Sana'a airport is closed for no reason. This is in general the type of violations that has been documented in 2018. I will just, before going to Christine, emphasize in one message in this meeting, which is accountability and which is the commission of inquiry. Maybe with such situation in Yemen, with horrible situation in Yemen, it's very logic. It's very logic to have an international investigation. I was a battle in the Human Rights Council to have a shape of international investigation. Finally, in 2017, we managed to have what called a group of eminent experts. They had their report in 2018, and then they are supposed to have their another report in 2019, but they have a very limited mandate. So we want to push for having a commission of inquiry with a stronger mandate. Those countries who can push for this are mainly France, UK, US are not in the Human Rights Council anymore, but those who are just pushing against any kind of international investigation just only because Saudis and Emiratis doesn't want this to be happened. So in Yemen, when we just keep seeing, documenting the violations, you will just know that is very unnecessary violations, very preventable violations. They just do it because they don't care. They don't feel that they will be held accountable. That's why the international investigation with a strong mandate referring to accountability might make the situation much different, because even if there is a war in Yemen, Yemen doesn't have to be the worst humanitarian disaster. It is the worst humanitarian disaster because all parties to the conflict, they just don't care. I'm sorry for talking a lot. Now I would just move to Christine.
So you can probably tell at the beginning why I'm very lucky to get to work with and learn from this group of people. One thing I kind of want to emphasize is, so even before working with Mwatana, I worked on Yemen, and this analysis is really one of its kind. So as many of you probably know, access to Yemen, particularly for foreign correspondents and media, is very, very, very difficult. So the fact that that Mwatana has been able to pull together more than 2,000 interviews and pull out major trends is really something spectacular. And what I want to do now is really just draw out, I think, why these findings matter in a broader sense on the Yemen sort of political and rights space. And I'll start off with why we're in Paris, so why all of this matters for France. One thing that is said often by allies to Saudi Arabia and the UAE is that, okay, well, maybe the coalition was bad in the beginning of the war, but they're improving, they're getting better. And I think that what Mwatana's findings demonstrate very, very clearly, again, the numbers that Radia told you are 150 coalition airstrikes in 1 year that caused civilian harm and killed at least 375 civilians and wounded 427 others, including many, many children, is that violations by the Saudi-led coalition certainly continue. And most of what people tend to talk about in the West when it comes to Yemen is arms sales and airstrikes, but the fact of the matter is that does still matter, because the violations that conversation is about continue, right? So you still have the coalition carrying out airstrikes on civilians and causing pretty immense damage, not just to the civilians killed and wounded, but also to the civilian objects and critical infrastructure that Yemen needs if it's ever going to rebuild. Another reason why this matters for France is that, again, speaking about French allies, the violations go beyond airstrikes. It's not just airstrikes. And I really want to emphasize, again, some of the stuff that Radia was saying about both Saudi Arabia and UAE proxy forces being directly implicated in torture. And that's not a light claim to make, right? So Mwatana in 2018 documented coalition forces stopping Yemeni fishermen, bringing them to Saudi Arabia, then abusing these people, beating them, torturing them inside Saudi Arabia, including a child, and then saying, oops, sorry, you're not Houthis, you're actually fishermen, you get to go back to Yemen. I mean, that's pretty egregious. UAE proxy forces similarly across Yemen have been implicated in arbitrary detentions and forced disappearances and torture. And again, these are French allies, and this is a big deal. And then the last thing I'll say just on the coalition side about why this matters to France and why France really does have leverage when it comes to pushing one particular side to this conflict on the violations that continue until this day is that the coalition and Hadi government have frequently criticized Ansar Allah, the Houthi armed group, for recruiting children, as they absolutely should, because the fact of the matter is Ansar Allah and the Houthi armed group are responsible for the majority of child recruitment cases that Mwatana and others have documented. And it's pretty awful, and it's been continuing since the beginning of this conflict. Yet the coalition and Hadi government are also implicated in child recruitment. Yes, the numbers are lower, but they're still implicated in child recruitment. So again, to just reemphasize some of the numbers that Radia mentioned, 17% of the cases Mwatana documented in 2018 were by Emirati proxy forces of child recruitment, and 11% by the Yemeni government and affiliated groups. And those are three very, very serious violations that the French can and really should be putting pressure on the Saudis, Emiratis, and Yemeni government to stop. The next reason why I think this report is relevant for global policymakers inside and outside France is that it's not just coalition abuses that are impacting civilians. And that comes out very, very clearly in this report, that there needs to be a way of putting more pressure on Ansar Allah to stop some of the really egregious violations that are continuing. I'm just going to highlight one. Radia talked about a lot of them, but this issue of landmines needs to be addressed now. It hasn't really been addressed. It hasn't been a global priority. And the fact of the matter is that has allowed Ansar Allah to keep using both anti-vehicle mines and anti-personnel mines with virtual impunity. And so a lot of the conversation around Yemen recently has been about Hodeidah and the Western Coast. Landmines have played a huge role on the Western Coast. One of the cases that Mwatana documented in 2018 was a landmine laid by Ansar Allah that killed 3 little girls, 9, 12, and 16. They were collecting firewood. And just think about what that means. So these people go back home, they think that the fighting has ended, and then they find the area that their home was littered with landmines. And this is going to be a scourge long after this conflict ends. So it's really something that needs to be reprioritized from an international perspective, because it's an international issue. You need resources to do demining, and you need accountability for the people and the commanders who are laying the mines. And then in terms of, it's not just the coalition, just again to reemphasize, something that's gotten very, very little attention is that throughout the entire Houthi coalition conflict, the US has continued carrying out drone strikes, right? And so drone strikes have been ongoing in Yemen for many, many years. And they get very little attention these days because, of course, the broader conflict is causing such immense harm. But that doesn't mean that the harm of drone strikes has stopped. And so just to again reemphasize, just in 2018, when I want to say the US claimed it killed no civilians in Yemen, Mwatana documented 6 strikes that did kill civilians, and including 3 kids. And again, in 2019, the same kind of stuff continues. I'm just going to make basically, I think, 3 more points. And that's, so Radia already made the point of you can't address the humanitarian crisis without addressing the rights crisis. One point that I want to make is, so again, a lot of the conversation coming out of the Stockholm discussion, for those who've been following Yemen closely, there were 3 agreements made in Stockholm, one on Hodeidah, one on detentions, and one on ties. Basically, all of the attention went to the one on Hodeidah on the Western Coast. And the agreements on detentions and ties, kind of people lost interest or stopped paying attention. And those really, really, really need to be reprioritized because, again, what Mwatana has documented is more than 200 cases of arbitrary detentions in just 2018, more than 200 cases of enforced disappearances, and multiple cases of torture. And the fact of the matter is releasing the arbitrarily detained, resolving disappearances, these sorts of things would have a huge impact for Yemeni civilians. And the warring parties are not going to do it unless additional pressure is put on them. So if all of the focus is on Hodeidah is very, very important, then they get away with being able to not just continue the abuses, but allow the people who are already in jail to just sit in jail and not even be able to talk to their families in many instances. The next thing is that if you want to rebuild Yemen, if you care about peace, then you need to support civil society now before it's destroyed. And that's another thing that comes out very, very clear in the report, is that a lot of times when we talk about war, we get fixated on particular attacks that have, you know, awful images that come out of them. And that's very important, of course. But kind of the slow death of Yemeni civil society that we're witnessing through the warring parties' restrictions on expression, through the suppression of peaceful dissent, through the detention of activists, through various attacks on activists, through various attacks on media, is really, really scary in a lot of ways, because these are the very people that you would want to be your partners in rebuilding the country, that you would want to be your partners in trying to sort of get back some of what's been lost. And yet there's been very, very little pushback on the practices of the warring parties to really sort of slowly crush and suffocate Yemeni civil society. And I think that's something that really needs to be reprioritized. And then the last thing I'll say is really just to finish on what Radia was saying, is not to give up on accountability. A lot of people these days, when they talk about conflicts, they kind of think about accountability as a pipe dream. And I think that would be a huge mistake in the context of Yemen, because the fact of the matter is, we're witnessing what that looks like. So one of the lines in the report that really struck me when I was first reading it was what fighting in places like Hajja and Saada and Taiz have looked like for Yemeni civilians, because there's been so little international attention on these particular conflict hot points and so much more attention on Hudaydah. And in an odd way, Yemen is actually kind of a story of hope, because you have seen these moments throughout the conflict where there is significant international pressure and it does have an impact and it can affect civilian life. But when you don't see that, you see the opposite. And so I think it really, really is important, and pushing for a commission of inquiry is one of the first ways to do that. But to really re-emphasize back to both Ansar Allah, the Hadi government, the Saudis, the Emiratis, and their proxy forces, that we are watching and that we're going to hold you accountable for the abuses that you're committing, and not just in the kind of prosecution sense, but also you have an obligation to pay redress, to help rebuild Yemen. And these are things that for Yemen could either be a very, very good example of what it looks like when states do prioritize this, and you really do need France to step up on this front, or it could be, once again, send the message that the lives of civilians are not going to be prioritized in international diplomatic discussions. And I very, very much hope it's the first. And I'm going to stop there and see if there's questions.
Thank you, everyone. So I'm sure there are a lot of questions. We're going to maybe take questions by group of 2 or 3. Yeah.
Peter Udo from Arte TV. I just would like you to talk. Sure.
Radia, reading your report, I was particularly interested in the fate of children, and it seems to me that they are the worst affected, among the worst affected by the conflict. And basically, I would like you to expand on this and to say how bad is the situation according to your report, but how bad might be the situation, because you mentioned the fact that it's only a part of the picture, it's not the wide picture.
Can we take another question? Yeah.
Just to complete, yes, again on children. Yeah, sorry, Hala Kodmani from Liberation. About children, yes, I'm always struck by the number of children every time there's an air raid. So is it also, I have another quick compliment. What is the situation of nativity now in Yemen? Are women having more children than usual or before? This is a question. My other question has nothing to do with that. You always mention UAE proxies in your report on when you talk. What does this cover?
We're going to start with these 2 questions, and then we'll take another round of questions. Nadia?
Okay, thank you for these questions. Yes, this war is not only destroying our presence, but also our future through destroying the children. Now millions of children. We were in a country that not everyone was educated, but we were struggling to have more people to be educated. But the amount of schools that has been destroyed in this war is horrible. It's more than 2,000 schools until now. So many children, they're not going to school anymore because of the war. And in many neighborhoods, you will see a lot of pictures of children who have been taken to the front lines and come like dead bodies after 1 week or 2 weeks. So in many neighbors that's supposed to be very educated neighbors, you will see children carrying weapons. That was not like this in Yemen before 2014. And now many families, they can't even control their children from going to fight. It's not easy, not only for because the money, it's because all this emotional, toll of death. They say that their friends has been killed because of this and this. And then the only response they have is just to run to the front lines. And all parties to the conflict, mainly Houthis, they are happy to just keep recruiting them. So the future of Yemen is destroyed through what's happening to children. This is rather than the very direct violations. You will see the numbers of children in everything. They have been killed in a very big numbers. And even in the recruitment, we started in 2018. We documented cases of girls, children who were recruited by Houthis. So it's one of the most sad stories. For women, if they are having more children, I guess, I don't know, I don't have numbers, but this is the situation everywhere. But I don't know, that the toll of death in Yemen is very huge. It's much more than what's in the report, because people in Yemen, they don't only die because of airstrikes and ground shelling. They die because of hunger, they die because of disease, they die because of very stupid incidents that they don't have a medical care. They die because there are the domestic violence has spread in Yemen much more than it happened before. The individual Yemenis are very peaceful people. They are not violent. The violence in Yemen is organized usually, but now because of especially because of the economic situation, because of people are not receiving their salaries for years. There was a cases of father who killed his 3 daughters. That was recently. This has never happened in Yemen before. Anyway, for the United Arab Emirates proxy forces, so now in Yemen, 20% of Yemen, almost 20% is controlled by Houthis. And most of the population is in this 20%. 80% is supposed to be controlled by Hadi government and the coalition. And this 80%, the coalition and Hadi, instead of rebuilding the state, they decided to empower armed groups in the ground, especially the United Arab Emirates. So we have Houthis as militias, but in the areas that where Houthis were kicked out of, they were replaced by another militias. And then the United Arab Emirates, they have their own forces like the security belt, the elite belt, and it is officially related to the United Arab Emirates. They are working against the idea of a state, against the idea of having a strong government, and they are doing a very horrible violations.
Sorry, the decision to withdraw or to
for the United Arab Emirates.
Yes.
So we have so the United Arab Emirates started to say that they withdraw from many places in Yemen, like the official forces. But now they empowered many Yemeni groups, a lot of them. They will really withdraw from Yemen if they stopped supporting these forces and armed groups. We will see what they are going to do. So the war in Yemen is much more than airstrikes and missiles. It's the attitude of parties to the conflict in the ground and the huge collapse of the state in Yemen.
Another round of questions, yes?
Hi there, Celia Hiddeberg for CNN. There's been recent pushback and legal decisions in the UK and other countries regarding weapons sale to the Saudi-led coalition. Can you speak a little bit to this, and do you think it'll have a real effect in terms of the human rights violations on the ground?
Do you want me to start, or do you want to start? Okay, so part of our work in Mwatana, I have to explain this. When we document the airstrikes, we try as much as we can to document the remnants of weapons. And we had just launched a report where we could find about 27 incidents where we could find remnants of weapons. Most of them are US, but part of them are UK also, and one Italian. Yes, we think that the countries who really can play a very positive role to stop the war in Yemen, they decided instead of this to fuel the war in Yemen by selling weapons. So we at the beginning at Mwatana thought that all the world need to try to stop the war in Yemen just to know the truth. That's why we document. We have a lot of risk to document violations. But in our advocacy tours that we discovered, it's not a matter of truth. It's a matter also of arms trade. It's a key word in the war in Yemen. So many countries that are supporting Saudis and Emiratis blindly just because of the financial interest. So one very clear example, it's the Commission of Inquiry. They were very excited to have Commission of Inquiry in Syria, but when it came to Yemen, it was very difficult to have a shape of international investigation. And those who were standing against it, it was US, UK, and France, just because they want to support Saudis in their decision. This is only one level of it. So yeah, it's not to stop selling weapons to Saudis and Emiratis, not only Saudis. It's not that they don't have enough weapons already to kill all Yemenis and their neighbors even. It's just, it's a message. And also to free these countries from being very polite in front of Saudis and Emiratis, and to have a strong voice against violations in Yemen, and to have a very strong voice to stop the war in Yemen. The peace in Yemen is very possible. I will have Christine to add.
Yeah, so you're going to have to forgive me because I'm going to get very excited. So the UK court decision was a really big deal. Like it's hard to emphasize how big of a deal it was. From both a legal perspective and the broader Yemen perspective. From a legal perspective, one of the reasons that the UK court decision was such a big deal was that basically what the UK government was arguing was that in assessing, and this matters for France, that in assessing whether or not there was a risk of continuing to sell weapons to the Saudi Arabia, the UK government was saying, we don't actually need to look, we don't need to assess whether or not they ever violated international humanitarian law in the past, which to any rational person, that seems kind of ridiculous, right? If you're assessing the risk of future violations, you need to know what they did in the past. But the UK government was basically saying no. The court said not only that that's not right, but that's irrational, that no logical policymaker could say that we can accurately assess the future risk of selling weapons to a country if we don't look at what they've done in the past. And the reason that matters for places like France and really across Europe is that while the UK court is a UK court and it was applying UK law, that UK law is a direct sort of incorporation of the EU common position. And so policymakers really across Europe should be looking at that UK court decision and thinking about what does that mean for us? And our argument would be that if a state wants to be in compliance with the EU common position or the ATT, it's very obvious that you're going to need to look at past coalition behavior to figure out if there's a risk of selling weapons in the future. And just to be very sort of on the nose about it, part of the reason they don't want to have to assess past coalition violations is because there's uncomfortable facts. It's very uncomfortable if you're going to have to be forced to look at what's happened in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018. And so that's sort of just from the legal perspective why the UK court decision matters, and why it matters really beyond the UK. And then from a broader perspective, just to go off what Radia was saying, and again, to like bring it back to France, the story of arms sales, what a lot of policymakers who don't want to deal with the issue of arms sales will tell you is, well, what will it really matter? What will the actual concrete impact be of us stopping selling weapons to the Saudis and the Emiratis? And the fact of the matter is, I'm pretty positive that they know that that's kind of not a genuine response, because if you actually look at the history of the conflict in Yemen and you look at the points where arms exporters have actually put pressure on the Saudis and Emiratis, either by actually stopping sales or even by a vote in Congress or what happened in the UK, you have seen the coalition respond. The coalition, the Saudis and the Emiratis are absolutely paying attention to what's happening on the arms sales question. And you've seen direct follow-ons from this sort of pressure. And so when we put all this effort into saying end arms sales to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, it's really not just this is a thing that we're advocating for. It's because it actually could have concrete impacts for civilians. And what I say that, I mean, A, it's a push towards peace. Right? If you want to push towards peace, probably don't keep selling weapons to warring parties. But from a more very concrete perspective, it matters if the Saudis and Emiratis adopt any changes to their targeting practices that would help better minimize civilian harm. It matters if the Saudis and Emiratis were to actually conduct credible investigations, if they were to actually provide reparations for civilians. These are things that they could do, and arms sales, stopping arms sales and saying we're not going to continue arms sales until you stop unlawful attacks, credibly investigate, hold potential war criminals accountable, and provide civilian redress. That is a direct tool to help try and push them to make these concrete steps that would have an impact on civilian life during the conflict, and ideally helping you push towards an end to the conflict.
Thank you, Christine. Just a reminder, you have press releases, and this press conference is live streamed all over the world. So you have in the press release media resources, including a link to an online version of the press of the report, including also a link to a cloud when you can download pictures from Mwatana about the report, and including a document summing up the key facts of the report, and a link to the many other reports that Mwatana are publishing. So I just wanted to flag that because it's important, including for the journalists who are following online from outside Paris. Another round of questions?
Hi, I'm Alex Turnbull, AP. I was just wondering if maybe, Radia, you could tell us a bit more about your methodology, how you work on the ground, the people you're in touch with, and how you work in these conditions.
Another question? Go ahead. Sorry.
Good morning, Anne Charon, Agence France Presse. You mentioned a lot of detention since 2014. Do you have any estimation of figures of how many people could be detained so far?
I'll start with the detention cases. So it's we document the detention cases and forced disappearance cases through the families. It's the only source of information. And in Yemen, the problem that most of the families, they are afraid even to talk about the detention cases. So we have documented like dozens and hundreds cases since 2014. I choose 2014 because in September 2014, Houthis, they controlled Sana'a by force. And then in March, the military intervention by the coalition happened. So it's very difficult to say that the numbers that Mwatana has is the right number. It's much bigger than what we have. Because many people, they don't want to talk about it. But it's hundreds all over Yemen. And the file of detainees, it's one of the files that put in the table in Stockholm. And until now, it is stuck. Nothing happened. Many of those, when we document the detention cases, it's the civilians. It's not the fighters. So I'm talking now about the civilians who were taken from their homes, streets, wherever. So it's stuck and nothing happened. And we face a lot of pressure from the families because they want to just hold any hope, whether to release their beloved ones or even to know if they are still alive or any cases. It's one of the very heavy files, honestly. And I hope that there is a pressure on all parties to the conflict to release all the detainees who are detained illegally and not only to wait for the exchange that's happening through the UN mechanism. I like to talk about Mwatana's methodology, so if I talked a lot, you can stop me. As I said, we have field researchers all over Yemen. So when we document, for us to be easier to move, our field researchers in Taiz, they are from Taiz. Our field researchers in Aden, they are from Aden. So they have the chance to move. So the tool they use, the main tool for gathering information in Mwatana is the interviews. So if we say that we have documented this incident, it means that one of our field researchers went to the site, had more than one interview with the eyewitnesses, survivors, families to the members. And also if it is an airstrike or a ground chilling, we assist the the area to see if there is a military target. And also we try to talk to doctors on humanitarian workers to have more information. And this is the first draft of the information. And it goes in many circles to make sure that the information is complete from our field researchers. And then we send it to our legal advisors or our legal experts. Regarding the remnants of weapons, if we find the remnants of weapons in some of cases, we send it to arms experts to know the whole details about the arms experts. Interviews is the main tool of our methodology. I don't know if Christine wants to add something. So, for example, if there is an airstrikes happened and then it was said in media that 100 has been killed, if we went to the site and found only the names of 50 people and the ages, we will not say 100. We will say in this incident, Mwatana has documented 50 civilians, and we document only civilians, and we work very hard to differentiate between the civilians and fighters. If we have any doubt that those people are not civilians, we prefer not to mention them rather than to mention them. We have very high standards in the definition of civilians, and we have thousands of civilians are already killed, so we are very careful in this. And our framework is the international humanitarian law and international law for human rights.
Right. I think maybe we can take one last questions, and if there are no more questions, we can end the press conference and spend much more time doing individual interviews with Christine and with Radia. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming today. And I wanted to thank Radia Al-Mutawakel and Christine Beckerley for the amazing work that they've done. You'll see in the report detailed examples of case studies of the various kind of violations that have been documented by Mwatana from all parties in Yemen. Thank you. Ce qu'on peut faire, c'est qu'on peut... Les journalistes télé peuvent se signaler à Samuel. Voilà. On va faire un groupe télé et un groupe radio. Comme ça, Christine et Radia peuvent alterner. Pour les interviews. On va
But I am very proud of your response. Really, because I wanted to say that because I have suffered a lot. My home was destroyed by the pollution. My son was kidnapped by the police. So I don't want him to be involved in this, just for the time being. Then later, yes, of course. Yes. You don't speak French. I don't speak French. Not a problem. Sorry. Arabic. Okay. Later on, I will. Okay.
Hi, sorry, my name is Celia Hedberg. I'm with CNN. We're working on kind of a longer coverage aspect of some of the sites, and so I don't have an interview request right now, but I was wondering if I could grab your card. Yeah. Are you based in Paris right now, or? No, I'm based in Beirut.
Okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to write down my email, sure, rather than struggle for my card. You're here?
Yeah, we're based here. This is the Paris Bureau, but we're in touch with the Beirut Bureau as well, so whatever works.
Yeah, I'm back to Beirut the end of July. And you guys are doing a longer piece on just the arms, or?
Probably the arms might turn out to be more digital pretty quick turnaround piece, but we're interested in kind of just developing our contact base so that we can dive into more in-depth coverage.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, anything would be great.
Okay, this is my email, and that's WhatsApp.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
I tend to be sometimes bad at responding to emails, so just shoot me a message on WhatsApp, and then I'll